soul in the light of spiritual science. It has been far from easy to discuss the basic principles of a science of the spirit, such as the one we are representing, as has been done in the lecture given 2 days ago. But it would be fair to say that because of current habits of thinking and forming ideas, it is something of a risk to present the fruits of research, which will be the subject of today's lecture. Because of those habits, some of the things I said 2 days ago must have seemed very strange. And understandably, it may not be easy for you to accept that what I am going to say today represents serious scientific research. It is more than likely that many people will take this to be the ravings of an overactive mind. Anyone wishing to speak about these things must be fully aware of this situation, and know that things which in a later age will be generally known, and indeed taken as a matter of course, will be considered highly peculiar and sheer fantasy when they are first presented. This is said in advance, to show that the spiritual investigator is quite aware of the perfectly understandable reaction people may have to his findings. Before I come to the actual findings, let me give you a brief outline of the basic inner attitude with which spiritual science is approached. It is utterly different from that used in other scientific disciplines. When it comes to understanding ordinary life and ordinary science today, we feel with some justification that we merely need to make our existing powers of understanding operative, as it were, to form an opinion on everything the physical world and natural science have to offer. In natural science, all effort is directed into research, careful observation, and use of the intellect to discover the laws of nature. The mood in which a spiritual investigator sets out to gain insight and discover the truth is completely different. When you enter this field of research, you come to feel more and more that all inner work and research effort must first of all be devoted to preparation, and that you want to wait and to prepare yourself even better before you approach a particular truth in a particular area. You come to realize that the more work and effort you put into the path which has to be taken in the inner life before you do any actual research, the more will you be ready to receive the truth. For genuine spiritual research is a matter of receiving truths. This inner feeling of mood grows so strong that you feel overawed and reluctant to let these things come to you. Again and again you prefer to wait when it comes to gaining essential insights in spiritual research, and not let them come to conscious awareness too early. As a result, the spiritual investigator develops a very special mood which gradually spreads to all the inner work, such as the exercises of which I spoke 2 days ago, and brings an attitude of awe and almost dread with regard to the truth. After these preliminary remarks, I want to speak quite freely and openly on tonight's subject, which is of tremendous importance to every human soul. We cannot really blame the people who continue to insist that the truths of religious faith are distinct from those of scientific knowledge, and that any ideas people may have regarding life beyond birth and beyond death can only be a matter of faith, and cannot be proved by applying stringent scientific criteria. This division between faith and knowledge does not exist in the science of the spirit, and when we seek to evolve the truths that lie beyond death, which is what I intend to do today, we feel ourselves to be in harmony with things that have long been wanting to come into the modern life of the mind and intellect. You feel in harmony with this if you consider over and over again that the great lesson discussed one of the greatest truths spiritual science has to offer in the work he wrote shortly before his death, a work which represents the mature fruits of a thinking heart and mind. Lessing did not hesitate to say that the idea of repeated earth lives need not be wrong just because it was more or less one of the earliest ideas to arise in human minds, before the prejudices of scholasticism and of philosophers spread a veil which clouded the knowledge of the world beyond death, knowledge which people still had in the early days of civilization. When you base yourself on the science of the Spirit, you therefore feel in harmony, and it would be possible to quote many other great minds as well, with people who count among the best and whose efforts have contributed so much to human civilization. 2 days ago, I said that to investigate the things and events connected with the life and the spirit, human beings must strengthen and enhance the powers which lie dormant in them, using the methods I described. Using the analogy of a chemist extracting hydrogen from water, I said this enables the soul of the spiritual investigator to separate from the living physical body and know itself outside the body. The soul is then able to know the meaning of the words, quote, "I experience myself as a non-physical entity of soul and spirit outside the physical body. My body and everything belonging to it in the physical world is then like one of the objects in the world outside that we can see with our eyes and touch with our hands." Close quote. On the last occasion, when I was able to give public lectures here in Vienna, I spoke of the significant moment in the life of the spiritual investigator when he is truly ready, having done the exercises of which I have spoken. Further information about these exercises may be found in my book titled Knowledge of the Higher Worlds, How is it Achieved? And in my title, Occult Science, an Outline. For the moment, let me say what the spiritual investigator experiences in principle. When the point has been reached where the soul is able to go out of the body, the experience will come one day, or indeed one night, for either is possible. And if there has been the right kind of preparation, the experience will cause no disruption in either of them. It may come in 100 different ways, and I will merely give you the essential character of it. It is as if you are waking from a sleep and know something is happening which is not a dream. It is removed from anything we perceive with the senses, all worries, passions, and whatever the concerns of the day may be. Or it happens that in the midst of daily life, you have to stop creating ideas in your mind, and something entirely different comes into your conscious life of ideas. The nature of it will be something like this. I want to give you as concrete a picture as possible of this soul-stirring event experienced by the spiritual investigator. The nature of the feeling is as if you are a house that has been struck by lightning. Everything around you falls apart, like a house that has been struck by lightning. The lightning goes right through you. It feels as if the elements are taking away everything material connected with you, and as if you are taken out of yourself, maintaining yourself now as a spiritual entity. It is the deepest, most soul-stirring experience you can imagine. From this moment, or a similar one, you know what it means to find yourself in your soul out of the body. Throughout the ages, spiritual investigators have used a term for this, which seems very apt indeed to anyone who has had the experience. Parenthesis, spiritual science has always existed, its form differing according to the particular civilization. Today's spiritual science differs from those of earlier times. It takes account of the advances made in modern natural science. What it is able to achieve, however, could also be achieved by the means available in other civilizations. Close parenthesis. The term used by spiritual investigators of many different ages for the experience I have just described is that you have arrived at the gate of death. And the experience which we would imagine to come with death does indeed come to us. It does not happen directly as a reality, for the spiritual investigators return to their bodies and everything is as it was before. They once again perceive the world around them, but everything spiritual investigators experience is an image of what actually happens when human beings go through the gate of death. Physical life comes to an end, and life after death begins. To understand how spiritual investigators arrive at the things of which we are speaking, we have to realize that careful preparation of the inner life takes them to a point where they are able to perceive in a totally different way than we perceive with the ordinary senses. They are truly able to look into the spheres of existence of which we are going to speak. The first thing to happen when one has gone through the kind of moment which takes one to the gate of death may be defined by saying, you get to the other side of human memory. The power of memory may be said to be the very beginning of a spiritual element in us. This is also accepted by people involved in philosophical studies who know nothing about spiritual science. Bergson, the French philosopher who has done such brilliant work, considers memory to be something purely of the spirit, which has nothing to do with biological or physiological functions. Once the prejudices of modern science, which have got themselves so firmly attached to almost everybody at present, are a thing of the past, people will realize that the store of memories in the inner life marks the first stage of transition from things that are bound to the senses and the brain to something that is pure inner life and spirit. When we push our ideas back down into memory, as it were, we do not preserve them by means of physical functions, but purely in the soul. I can only hint at this now, for it would take much time and additional lectures to present the scientific reasons for this. In everyday life we perceive memory images which arise from the store of memories we hold. Because of the way they present themselves, there is nothing to induce us to treat them as illusions or hallucinations. The soul of the spiritual investigator perceives events and facts which are spiritual by nature. These do not come from the store of memories, but from worlds of the spirit. One then finds it is possible to have experiences which lie behind the store of memories, as we call it. What the spiritual investigator sees is more or less as follows. Your soul has now been drawn out of your body, and this means that you can now really look at the store of memories you have gained from the physical world, for it has become an object outside you. Yet, this store of memories is like a veil which covers something which always lives in the soul, though it is unconscious. Human beings spread their memories out in the soul, and this subconscious element in soul and spirit is covered up. When spiritual investigators rise into the inner spiritual life, they do of course have their memories, which are attached to their inner spiritual life like the tail of a comet. But they are able to look through their memories and see something which we might call powers of a higher kind than the powers which preserve our memories. If the term were not so unpopular, and it is difficult to find suitable expressions for these things, which have no connection with the physical world, we might say, you rise from memory to supermemory. You gradually come to what we called, quote, forming imaginative ideas, close quote. With memory, we always feel that when memory images come up and present themselves to the mind, we are actually quite passive. But when you go deeper down and go behind your memory, you know you have to take an active part in producing the imagination that seeks to come up as the content of a supermemory. Having gone through the right kind of preparation, you also know that the supermemory has always been there and has merely been covered up by your memory. Perceiving its true nature, you also know that the element which pushes its way down into the depths, lying below the store of memories, is itself actively working on our physical organism. You also make another discovery, one that is extremely important for the relationship of spiritual science to natural science. Natural scientists are saying today, everything human beings feel, think, and will is bound to the functions of the nervous system. This is correct. But natural science does not have the means to discover how the inner life is bound to the nervous system, or, for example, how our thinking is tied to the brain. For this, we have to go to the much deeper foundations of the inner life. Spiritual science shows that in terms of our ordinary ideas of everyday life, and also in scientific work, it is quite correct to say that all the thoughts we produce, and, for example, also our inner responses, are bound to the brain. The question is, how are they bound to the brain? The deeper part of the soul, of which we know nothing in our ordinary consciousness, and which is only discovered with the aid of spiritual science, initially works on, let us say, a particular part of the brain, sending its active forces into senses and brain. It is the work done by the inner life, lying beyond conscious awareness, which makes the nervous system into a mirror which reflects the events of everyday life. Mirror images of the inner life of soul and spirit present themselves in everyday life. It is just as if you were walking up to a mirror hanging on the wall. You would not be seeing yourself, but a mirror image of yourself. This is exactly what you do when you think, form mental images, feel and use your will in everyday life. The deeper part of the soul works specifically on the nervous system and the brain, and it is due to this work that we are able to have sensory perceptions. Work done on the eye, for example, makes the eye function in a particular way, reflecting color into the inner life of soul and spirit. Spiritual science will help people to realize that it is we ourselves who live in the mental images we form, and with the aid of our deeper nature, prepare the body so that it becomes an apparatus reflecting our inner experiences. This is how it is in the ordinary life, which is lived in space, in the outside world. Something else has to happen the moment our mental images become memory images. We have to pay attention, otherwise those images flit past like dreams. Anything to be preserved as a memory needs a longer period of concentration than, say, a mere mental image. A color we have perceived would not stay in our memory if we looked at it only for as long as is needed to create the color sensation. If we look at it for a longer time, we appeal to the power which keeps all such things in our souls as memories. We push our inner activity back, as it were, into a deeper part of our being. And this turns out to be not the physical body, but something more subtle and ethereal than the physical body. In quotes, ether is another term, which is far from popular today, but the meaning it has in spiritual research is not the one it is usually given. The element, which is more subtle and ethereal than the physical body, is an etheric body, which is spiritual by nature. The soul not only creates memory images. Through its dealings with the outside world, during the life between birth and death, it also takes considerable activity into itself. But the strange thing we discover, through spiritual science, is that our memories remain mere images, because they are held back by the ether body and not allowed to enter into the physical body. If they did enter into it and become active in it, they would seep into the powers which generate the physical body and give it life, and would completely organize the physical body. We let our mental images stay mental images, and do not need to let them become organic functions. Thus their character as memories remains unchanged, and we preserve their power as images. The soul also develops powers in life, which are much more powerful than those which create memories. Initially, these powers are also kept in the soul, but they are kept behind the ordinary store of memories, so that they are like a supermemory in us. Spiritual investigators who are able to perceive the store of supermemories behind the ordinary memory then know the following. Something lives in your soul which cannot influence your physical body. It lies below the surface of your memory, but does not take effect in the physical body as it is today, between birth and death. It does not stay a mental image, nor does it become a power acting on the organism. This is the experience spiritual investigators have when they are out of the body. They also experience the following, and once they are clear in their minds about this, they are able to say, I experience something in my soul which is there, but is not put to any use, as it were, for it cannot enter into the body which has developed from birth, or let us say conception, for there is no room for it. Entering wholly into this element, spiritual investigators gain living experience of it and come to know it just as we come to know the seed that forms in a plant. A plant develops all the way from root to fruit, and the fruit contains the seed, which therefore has been part of it from the beginning. The seed has no role to play in the plant. It cannot send its powers into the plant. Instead, it is the germ of a plant that will follow, say, the year after. Spiritual investigation takes us into something which is a kernel, a seed in the soul. And we realize that this is produced in the present life between birth and death, but does not unfold its powers in this life. It goes down into the deeper regions of the soul and lies there ready for a future life, just as the seed in a plant is there for a future plant that would not develop if it were not for the plant which precedes it. When we know how to enter deeply into the realm of the soul, we reach understanding of the harmony that exists between successive lives on earth and the whole of the physical world outside us. It is important, however, that spiritual investigators never lose sight of the fact that the experiences they have to go through can only be such that they must, over and over again, be conscious of their own active involvement. If they are not, and if they fail to realize how these things have arisen, these impulses become illusory, hallucinatory, or mere figments of the imagination. It is quite wrong to say, yes, but how can spiritual investigators know that the things they discover are not hallucinations, illusions, and figments of the imagination? Surely they may well be hallucinations based on autosuggestion. This objection would be perfectly justified if spiritual investigators were to take the attitude to these things that a diseased mind takes to hallucinations. For they come to us just like external objects perceived with the senses, and we cannot see through them. However, spiritual investigators have gone through the right preparation. You can read about it in my book titled Knowledge of the Higher Worlds, and are therefore able to differentiate between mere reminiscences of the outside world and also figments of the imagination and hallucinations, to which we relate passively, and the things that present themselves in such a way that we realize, just as we do when we see letters or a word written on paper, that they are not what they look like, but something else. Spiritual investigators do not use the things they perceive in the same way as people use hallucinations, but in a way that may be compared with the mind reading something written in the imaginations which present themselves. We have to learn to use the things we put before the mind through our own activities from choice, and in such a way that we live in them, just as we live in something written, seeing through it and perceiving what it means. We have to gain this kind of inner strength through development, and thus attain to inner vision. Only then will we truly perceive events and entities which belong to the world of the spirit. We then gradually come to be at home in the element of our inner life, which is not identical with the body, and find the part of ourselves of which we may say that it has the quality of immortality. Spiritual science is not a speculative form of philosophy, where you consider the possible reasons for immortality of soul. Spiritual science shows you how to reach the soul itself, and then reveals the real nature of this true soul. It lays the soul bare, as it were. And you then find that the soul is not a product of the physical body, but rather that the body is the product of the soul principle you discover. On the one hand, we discover the kernel of the soul, and are able to feel and experience this as the seed for a future life on earth. On the other hand, in becoming conscious of contents that lie above the store of memory, we also experience the essence of the physical body, which enters into human beings before they enter into physical existence at birth, or, let us say, conception. When we perceive with the senses, the soul itself prepares the brain in terms of space so that the brain reflects its contents. We also discover that the element of soul and spirit, to which we have penetrated, existed in a world of the spirit before our birth and conception. There, it gained the powers it needed to unite with the physical substance provided by the father and the mother, to take this substance into itself and organize it so that it would suit its needs. We find that when human beings come into the world, they are not merely the offspring of a father and a mother, but that the spiritual principle unites with the physical material provided by the parents, having itself come from worlds of the spirit, where it lived between the last death and the present conception. Discovering the part of the soul which lies beyond our memory, we also come to realize what the soul is like when the physical body no longer inhibits the activities of soul and spirit, which is when death has come for the human being. When this has happened, the reality shown through spiritual science is that the soul, first of all, lives in the part which has not become physical during life on earth, in the store of memories. During the first stages after death, a wide panorama of memories relating to everything experienced between birth and death opens out before the human being. This takes just a few days. Spiritual investigators are able to understand this first after-death experience because they know the true nature of the memory. When the soul is out of the body, spiritual investigators can enter into conscious experience of something which we experience when we have gone through the gate of death. When they are out of the body, their whole thought content presents itself, but now as a whole world. Normally, we have mountains, clouds, stars, sun, moon, rivers, and cities around us. When we are out of the body, we first of all gain a panoramic view of everything we have experienced. But we are able to see through it and perceive its power to act. Once you have got accustomed to seeing through these things when out of the body, you gradually also gain the ability to direct your attention deliberately to what the soul lives through after death, what it has lived through after your last death, and what will come after the death which lies ahead. First of all, the panorama of memories spreads out before you. Yet behind this appears another power of the soul. When death lies behind you, this power is no longer inhibited by the body. It takes effect, causing the memory images to disappear after a few days. As I said at the beginning, speaking about the subject of today's lecture is a venture involving some risk. But we have to touch on these things if we are to talk of more than just generalities. I have tried to show what has been discovered through spiritual research concerning this first after-death experience. It has been found that this review of memory images relating to experiences from the last life takes a different length of time with different people. It takes longer for some and less time for others. Generally speaking, it takes about as long as the time for which the individual would have been able to stay awake if prevented from going to sleep in the life which now lies behind. Some people can hardly keep awake for a single night, others for many nights. The inner power to overcome sleep is the measure for the number of days for which the review will continue before something else takes its place. The new element is something we can only really enter into if we know it already from out-of-body experience. It is extremely difficult to find words for this, for these experiences are utterly different from those we have in everyday life. Our language has been created for the physical world. Anything outside this world is experienced in a totally different way. Forgive me, therefore, if some of the words and phrases I use seem awkward or even paradoxical. I can assure you that when one tries to use ordinary words to describe something which is difficult to put in words, it is impossible to describe how experiences which follow the memory review present themselves to the soul. The things the soul of the spiritual investigator now experiences when out of the body are something I want to call, quote, feeling combined with will, close quote, or, quote, will combined with feeling, close quote. For it is somewhere between the two. It is a power we develop. We do not have it in everyday life. Spiritual investigators know it. It is as if the will moves along with us in the world, and as if this will, as it moves, bears on its wings or waves a feeling element that comes as if from outside, coming toward us on the waves of the will. We normally experience our feelings as something with which we have inwardly grown together, but now it becomes something which surges and actively moves on the waves of the will. At the same time, we know that because we spread out into the world as we experience this, so that the will combined with feeling, or feeling combined with will, is out there in the same way as colors and sounds are perceived outside us in the physical world, our own true nature has entered into it. There is a feeling out there that we perceive in the way we perceive light, but at the same time we also feel connected with it. Initially, after the memory review, the experience is that the only world which can be perceived is the world we left behind at death. When the panorama has faded, this feeling combined with will, or will combined with feeling, unfolds and increases in power in the soul. However, it will only bring things to expression which are connected with our last life on earth. The things we experience may, therefore, be characterized more or less as follows. Life on earth never allows human beings to experience everything it really has to offer. Many things remain such that we may say, we have not taken in everything we might have taken in, and which could have made an impression on us between birth and death. Something by way of desires, wishes, love for others, and so on, had to remain between the lines of life. The spirit now looks back with desire to things left undone, and it does so for years. These are the years when our soul consists mainly of what we have been. We look into our last existence on earth and see what has been left undone. We have to live for years in a sphere where none of this can be brought to a satisfactory conclusion in the way it can be brought to a conclusion on earth, because we have laid aside the physical organs which would enable us to do so. Thus we gradually work our way through the things that tie us to our last life on earth. Again, spiritual science must consider the time taken up by these experiences, and we are able to say the following. The period of early childhood, up to the time to which our memory is able to go back, does not affect the time taken by the experience I have described, nor does the time we live through after our 25th, 26th, or 27th year. The years from about the 4th year of life until we are in our 20s indicate the length of time during which we are still connected with the last life on earth and have to gather experiences from that life and withdraw from it. Spiritual investigation shows that the time taken to find our way out of the last life on earth is about as long as the time we took after our previous life in the spirit to build up our bodies, as it were, with the powers which follow an upward trend until we reach the mid-20s. It is as long as the time it took us to fill life with physical powers, powers that are fruitful at the organic level, and powers that bring desire and the seeking of rewards. Anyone who lived to the age of 12, say, would only need between 5 and 7 years to leave the last life on earth behind. Yet if someone has lived to the age of 50, the years between the mid-20s, the years beyond the mid-20s will not be added onto this particular period. To some extent, human beings will begin to perceive spiritual events and entities around them when they have gone through this for some time. As I have mentioned before, spiritual investigators are in a real world of the spirit when they experience themselves in soul and spirit. The dead enter into that world, but initially they are so much occupied with the previous world in the way I have discussed that they can only relate to their new surroundings by a roundabout route which goes through the previous world they knew. Let me give you an example. Someone has gone through the gate of death and completed the review. He is now living in the period where he tears himself free from anything relating to his life on earth. Someone whom he loved is still in the physical body. The human being who is still at the stage of which we have been speaking cannot make a direct connection with the person who is still on earth, but a kind of relay system develops. In the last life on earth, we loved the person who has been left behind, and when we are at the stage under discussion, we turn to the love we have felt. Our feelings are our environment at that time. Looking at them, we find the way to the person who is still on earth. We also have to go via our feelings when we want to find the way to a soul that has gone through the gate of death. Thus we can say, after death the human being lives with human souls, but initially by a roundabout route taken through one's own life. Gradually, a power develops in the soul, which spiritual investigators also know when they experience themselves in soul and spirit outside the body. There is now no way of expressing this. We were at least able to call the last power discussed, quote, will combined with feeling, or feeling combined with will, close quote, because it has some similarity with the will and with feeling. The will impulses and feelings have become external objects, but the things which surge out there as elements of will and feeling still have some similarity with the impulses of will combined with feeling that we have in ordinary life. Now, however, the soul is getting further and further away from the last life on earth, and experiences a power coming to life in it, which I can only describe in terms that may sound clumsy, but are nevertheless to the point. Creative power of the soul. This now comes to direct experience. The soul very much finds itself entering into an activity, and at the same time finds that this creative power truly develops, radiating from the soul into the environment, and again, a clumsy way of putting it, but I will have to use the term in order to make myself understood. This power shines out into the environment like a light of the Spirit. It illuminates the events and entities around us, so that we are able to see them. When the sun rises, we see the objects around us. In the same way, our own inner power of light pours out, and we see the events and entities in the world of the Spirit. The term used in religious life to describe life after death is not appropriate. This state where we feel ourselves to have creative power, getting to be at home in a spiritual environment that becomes visible as we send our own creative powers into it, this experience of the outpouring of light is a feeling of bliss. Even pain is experienced as bliss in this world, where the soul now goes through further experiences. It has to be realized that the soul can only go through this experience in alternating states. Parenthesis. This takes us into realms which are utterly fantastic in terms of ordinary life. But having said what I did say in preparation, I can now also come to these things. It has to be clearly understood that spiritual investigators will never say anything other than that such things can only come to them when they live out of the body. Close parenthesis. The soul, then, is not always in the state where the power of spiritual light shines out from it, where human souls and spiritual entities are around it, and it experiences spiritual events. This state must alternate with one where the soul feels that the radiance of the Spirit coming from it dies down. The soul grows dull inside and can no longer illuminate its surroundings. It has to take all that it is back into itself. Now comes the moment when the soul lives in a completely solitary life in the time between death and rebirth, and this takes a long time. If we wanted to compare it with ordinary life, we may say that in ordinary life, human beings alternate between sleeping and waking, and after death, they must alternate between a life that pours out into the outside world and a life of inner solitude. Then everything previously experienced as being spread out is gathered in, and the soul knows. You are now entirely by yourself. In sleep we become unconscious. Here we withdraw into ourselves, but do not lose consciousness. The soul's conscious awareness is in fact heightened during the periods of solitude, and the experience is such that the soul knows outside is the world of the spirit, but you are by yourself. Everything you experience now, you experience inside yourself. Those experiences are the echoes of what the soul experienced when it was outside. It needs this so that the power of light may grow strong and shine out once more. You then wake up again, as it were, in the spirit and experience the other state. It is a very strange experience when you actually have to learn to connect a meaning with the words that between death and rebirth the soul lives a sociable life with other spirits and then lives in solitude, and that this alternation between sociability and solitude, which however takes much longer than day and night, is something similar in life after death as sleeping and waking are in physical life. I made some mention of this in my penultimate book. But as it lives on between death and rebirth, the soul finds that the power of its light is gradually fading. We might say that the experiences of inner solitude grow stronger and stronger, gradually reaching the point where the human being experiences a whole inner world, an inner cosmos. It really is the case that the human being is overcome with something like fear of himself when he discovers all the things that are now about halfway between death and rebirth, emerging from the depths of the soul. Then comes a time which I have tried to present in my fourth mystery play titled The Soul's Awakening. It is a time when human beings can only have inner experiences, with the nights of solitude growing longer and longer. They are no longer able to wake in the spirit to an awareness where the power of light radiates out from them. I have tried to express this experience by using the symbolic term, the midnight hour of existence in the spirit between death and rebirth. Then human beings have their world in everything which lies in the depths of their souls, and only know, beyond the shores of your soul are the worlds of the spirit. There all the spiritual entities are to be found, and all human souls both in and out of the body, and all other entities. They only know of this because they have its echoes in them. Then something arises in the soul which again cannot be fully described by an ordinary word. In ordinary language, longing is the most passive element in the soul. We are more passive when we have longings in physical life than we are in anything else. We long for something, desire something we do not have, and our longing certainly will not produce the object for which we long. We can only be entirely passive. However, powers of soul take on a completely different character when the soul is out of the body. Out of the depths of solitude, out of the soul's experience at the cosmic midnight hour of the spirit, arises the longing to live in the world again from which our solitude has taken us. This longing grows active and turns into a spiritual reality, an organizing power. It truly becomes a new power of perception. Longing in the spirit gives birth to a new inner power, one that is able to perceive an outside world, though this is both an outside and an inside world. It is an outside world because it truly exists outside our own self, and an inside world because we see it as the world of everything we lived through when we were last incarnated on earth. Because of our longing, this then becomes our outside world. We look at all the things which were left undone in that previous life, and our longing fashions powers in us to balance out the bad, stupid, and ugly things we did when we are in a new life. This is the time when every human being is able to look back over previous earth lives, seeing with eyes of the Spirit everything that was done in those lives. And the inclination arises to balance these things out in a new life on earth, completing and making good the experiences gone through in earlier lives. I have known people who said that one life was enough for them. I even knew a man who came close to thinking repeated earth lives a sensible idea, only he then sent a postcard from the nearest railway station to say that he did not want to know about another life on earth after all. However, it does not matter whether we can have an idea of repeated earth lives or not. What matters is that at the point of which I am speaking, every soul looks back on earlier earth lives and at the same time receives the inclination to live a new life on earth that will balance out earlier lives. You also find there are people to whom you owe something or who owe something to you, and the inclination develops to share life again with the people to whom you owe something, so that the debt may be paid. Other people develop the same inclination. This awakens inner powers in a number of people who previously lived at the same time, and these powers incline them toward the earth. The result is that people who were together before come together again on earth. The things they owe each other need to be balanced out. These inclinations gain in power and come increasingly more alive as life between death and rebirth continues. And human beings create the spiritual idea, the archetype of their new life on earth, out of what they have learned about their earlier lives. Human beings themselves create the new life that will unite with the physical substance given by the Father and the Mother. Depending on the nature of that physical substance and its affinity to the spiritual idea, this spiritual idea is drawn toward the physical substance before conception occurs. And we may say that the elective affinity between inherited qualities and the archetype decides who the parents will be to whom the soul feels drawn as if by a magnet, and also decides the kind of life one finds for oneself. This is how the human being returns to earth and unites again with the physical body. Spiritual science shows the mystery of childhood development. Anyone who knows how to observe childhood life will find this to be true. When facial expression gradually emerges, dexterous movements develop from clumsy movements, and the powers that are so obviously at work inside shape and model the body. Spiritual investigators see how something which has gone through the experiences that come between death and rebirth, and of which I have spoken, unites more and more with the living body. They are now able to see why initially there can be no memories of pre-birth experiences. The powers which have the capacity to become powers of memory are used to organize the living body. Children could indeed remember everything that has gone before, for they have the powers, but these powers are transformed. When I run my finger across the surface of this table, the powers of friction are transformed into heat. In the same way, those powers of memory are transformed into organizing powers. Transformed powers which go back to the past inwardly organize the whole of the child's body and give shape and form to the brain, so that the child will later be able to think and to develop powers of memory in the physical body. The form in which these powers were able to develop the panoramic review disappears, and they organize the whole of the body. The spiritual principle that organizes the body is a transformed soul principle which has flowed into the body. We understand the life in which we are now if we understand what happened outside this life and beyond death. The principle which is active in life on earth has gained its powers between death and rebirth. The powers which were then purely of the spirit are transformed powers of memory which flow into the body and organize the whole of it. One day scientists will discover that the powers which are entirely dedicated to heredity also go through a process of being created in the human being at the time when the power of reproduction develops. Certain lower animals die as soon as they are mature enough to give birth to another animal. The powers human beings must develop in order to have physical offspring and pass things on to them through heredity must be fully developed when sexual maturity is reached. I can only mention this briefly. Natural science and spiritual science together will be able to provide important insights in this field. Spiritual principles are, however, active in everything that is physical power in human beings. Powers of spirit are active in the physical body, penetrating every part of it. The physical body is like a reflection of the spiritual principle. Fundamentally speaking, the processes which allow the body to function as a mirror are destructive processes. When we see colors or hear sounds, this always involves destructive processes, and we also produce destructive processes inside us when we produce memory images. And people need to sleep, for otherwise only destructive processes would be active in them. We live by letting powers we have acquired outside the body penetrate this body and give it powers. Life can only be understood if we consider the element of soul and spirit which is active in life. Things are not as simple in spiritual science as they are in other fields of study. And we cannot speak of the death of plants and animals in the same way as we do of the death of human beings. Everything I have said today applies only to human beings, and we see that spiritual science extends our horizons beyond birth and death. Even details find an explanation. I can well imagine that the ladies and gentlemen in the audience who have some interest in the findings of spiritual research would like to hear some details. I can, however, only give a few of these details today. The first example is one that, paradoxical as this may seem, will strike even spiritual investigators as a real mystery in life. It is the existence of criminal characters. The view held in spiritual science certainly is not that criminals deserve nothing but our compassion and should not be punished. It is not the business of spiritual investigators to meddle in the outer affairs of the world, but they do want to understand the things we find in human life, and they want to do so out of the depths of the world of the spirit. So we ask ourselves, what is the situation when a life turns out to be criminal? Well, it is easy to say this, but it is a struggle to find the answers to questions like these, and essentially also a struggle to talk about them, for they seem very strange indeed in the light of present-day ideas. If clairvoyant vision is directed toward the criminal element, we find that criminals are born prematurely, as it were, in a spiritual sense. Every soul has the normal opportunity to come down from the worlds of the spirit and unite with physical substance. The inclinations which lead to this interact with other inclinations, however, so that most people, and especially criminals, come into life on earth earlier than they should. This is the strange discovery we make. Something else happens as a result. It is only possible to enter fully into the living body and be a full human being on earth if you reincarnate at approximately the normal time. If there are reasons to come down to earth earlier because of events in earlier lives, you bring something with you which lives in the subconscious and of which you are not consciously aware. In the depths of the soul lies something that is rather like not taking life seriously, because the individual has not come to earth at the time when it would have been possible to unite most fully with the physical body. The bond is therefore only a superficial one. People are not aware of this, however. It is then possible to have an abnormally developed instinct for self-preservation at the upper level of the conscious mind, so that the individual is hostile toward the social world, develops an extreme egotism, and becomes a criminal. Yet inwardly, and this is not known, the criminal may have a tendency to be superficial and not take life seriously, putting no value on it. This is due to premature birth in the spirit. The individual concerned may then also fire the overdeveloped instinct of self-preservation with the unconscious tendency not to take life seriously, and you see this grow and flourish in criminal characters. Once I realized this, something else became clear to me. A dictionary of thieves' cant has been published, and you really only understand this form of language where life is taken seriously, and words are used that come from the subconscious level of the soul. When you know the things I have just mentioned, I read that poorly, readers aside, a dictionary of thieves' cant, C-A-N-T, I believe that's just their form of speaking. Okay, end of readers aside. It must always be pointed out, however, that in the totality of earth lives, the crimes of one life are made up for, and it is exactly because they experience the consequences of their criminal activities that criminals progress to other earth lives where things are balanced out. Other things also become clearer when we consider the mysteries of life in the light of spiritual science. We see people die in an accident or disaster, for instance. Oddly enough, we find that if people die from such causes at a time when they otherwise would not yet have left the earth, that is, when their physical powers still extend beyond the time of death. When someone is run over by a steam locomotive at the age of 34, for instance, someone who is not seeking to take his own life, his body still holds powers that could have become active. When the individual leaves the physical world, those powers do not vanish into nothingness. Instead, the investigator sees that the element of soul and spirit, the powers of intelligence and the powers of thinking things out more accurately, may actually be enhanced because of that very accident. The individual concerned may be reborn with greater powers of intelligence than someone who has died a natural death. You have to accept the fact that spiritual science, which considers life within a wide horizon, has to present many things differently from the way in which they are presented in everyday life. Someone who dies relatively early from a disease, say, and who has gone through a lot because of this disease, has prepared the soul in such a way that powers of will may be enhanced. Dying early from a disease enhances the powers of will. Some of these things may seem quite unbelievable. Perhaps you will permit me to say, however, that I am conscious of my responsibility in speaking about them. I would not discuss them if I did not know the means by which they can be known with the same certainty in spiritual science as objects in the outside world can be known. I would consider it frivolous in the extreme to say such things, unless one has inner knowledge and says them in the kind of mood I have just indicated. Understanding of human life is thus gained from things that are outside physical life. The life which evolves between birth and death is the outcome of the life which lies beyond birth and death. Some may feel that this lessens the value of life. Let me briefly repeat the following, so that none of you may feel like this. Someone may say, "You tell us that we ourselves have prepared the events we experience during life on earth." This is true. But when we are in an accident, we are in it because we have originally implanted the inclination in the soul to get involved in the accident. Alpine plants, which do not thrive in lowland plains, seek out high altitudes. In the same way, the human soul seeks out a situation where it will be involved in an accident. It grows into what it then experiences as destiny. It is the natural destiny of those plants to grow in the Alps. It is natural for a human soul to plunge into misfortune, where the inclination to do so has come with the insight that overcoming such a misfortune will make the soul more perfect in a particular respect, whilst it would have to remain less perfect if it did not have that misfortune. People may say, "This means we forge our own misfortunes, and it is no consolation to be told not only that we should suffer and endure our misfortunes, but that we have in a sense earned them in the world of the Spirit." The answer must be, and I have shown this before using an analogy, when a young man has lived a well-to-do life, paid for out of his father's pocket until he was in his 18th year, has not learned anything during those years, and his father then goes bankrupt, this may appear to be a great misfortune, for life will be hard. Quite rightly, our young man would now find life a misery. Let us assume, however, that at the age of 50, he looks at life from a different point of view and says to himself, "I would not be what I am today if I had not fallen into misfortune then. It has been a misfortune for my father, but for me it was the leaven that allowed life to develop." We are not always in a position to see our misfortunes from the right point of view when we are caught up in them. Before we are born, our point of view is entirely different from what it is afterward. It is that the experiences of a new life must balance out the things which happened before. We then prepare for ourselves the misfortune that we will be right to accept and suffer later on, and about which we are also right to complain, because at the time we see it only from the point of view of what happens in physical life on earth. There are a few more things I should like to say about the time between death and rebirth. I have already mentioned the brief period of review which comes after death. It is only a matter of days. The period that follows takes longer. It is a matter of decades. Spiritual investigators use something like the following method to establish the length of this period. In order to develop the powers they need to gain insight into such things, they must first of all ask themselves, when you are out of the body, which element in your soul presents itself to you as something which the soul can take with it through death? Strangely, the experience they get is that on this occasion something is taken out of the body, whilst normally everything is left behind. When spiritual investigators leave the body, they leave behind their passions, memories, and so on. But they take with them all efforts made to overcome difficulties. This is something we can only gain after reaching the 20s, let us say. People will not be pleased to hear this, for nowadays young people are considered capable of even the highest things before they have reached their 20th year. Yet the truth is that when we really have experiences because of what we are, and in such a way that they become a store of wisdom, this happens because we have already gained other experience and look back on this when new experiences come. The inner experiences gained as we work our way up inwardly by our own effort lay the first foundations for the experiences the soul will have between death and rebirth. The soul must therefore live in constant effort, overcoming obstacles and transforming powers. As a rule, it then remains in the world between death and rebirth for as long as anything still remains to be transformed. From another aspect, we may say the following. We grow into a particular time, taking in and learning things as members of a particular tribe or nation. When we went through death, we used this to create life experiences. But the earth changes, and not only in its physical aspect. Perhaps members of the audience will be so kind and think themselves back into the time, say, when Christianity was founded, to consider what the area where Vienna is today may have looked like then. However, the signs of civilization on the face of the earth, which are the spiritual element in our environment, from which we gain our store of memories, change within even shorter periods of time. Souls normally only return to earth for a new life when they are able to find a completely new spiritual environment. We find that souls are not reborn at random, but in a way which enables them to gain new experiences. This means they have to change everything they knew in the last life on earth. For instance, the ability to express themselves in a particular language. They have to acquire new language skills. This is a time scale which goes in hundreds of years. It normally takes something like 1,000 or 1,500 years. But as I said, under certain circumstances, people may be born prematurely in the spirit. Time is getting short, and I cannot go into more detail. Do let me say, however, that if any of you were inclined to go home feeling, "All this is really quite unbelievable. Surely he cannot claim to know these things," you should recall what I said at the beginning, which is that in the past, too, things which later on would be taken for granted, with everybody knowing about them, seemed strange indeed when they were first told. Anyone involved in the science of the spirit today has to accept that people will quite understandably consider things sheer fantasy, which later will be accepted as surely as the ideas put forward by Copernicus have come to be accepted, even though in the beginning many people thought them to be sheer fantasy and even harmful. Let me mention once more the image that spiritual investigators and people who are able to understand the science of the spirit call to mind to make them conscious of the truth that will gradually win the day. This truth may have to squeeze through extremely narrow clefts, with powerful rock masses of prejudice pressing down on it, but it will win through. It helps to strengthen this awareness if we remember Giordano Bruno. He shattered prejudices which were hundreds of years old, saying, "People believed that when they looked up into the wide space yonder, the blue vault of heaven spread above them, sun and planets would have their orbits in it, with the blue vault of heaven being a wall, a blue wall." Giordano Bruno said, "This wall merely appears to you, because that is as far as your powers of perception will go. You have created your own limit, but it does not really exist. Infinities of space extend out there, and those infinities of space are filled with an infinity of worlds." Today, spiritual investigators have to remember that human vision has expanded into the infinities of space, and that it was Giordano Bruno who first pointed out that the limits set by the vault of heaven were merely the limits of human powers of perception. They have to point out that the time limits set for human experience are another such firmament. When we consider human life with our physical organs of perception and with the intellect, we see the limits marked by birth and death, just as people in the past saw the limit set by the blue vault of heaven, a limit which did not exist. The limit set for human experience between birth, or let us say conception, and death owes its existence to the limited human powers of perception. Beyond birth or conception and beyond death lies an infinity of time, with repeated human lives on earth and lives between death and rebirth embedded in it and extending both backward and forward. I cannot tell you everything about those repeated lives, how they once had a beginning, and that human beings were born out of the spirit and found their dwelling place here on earth. The earth itself evolved out of the world of the spirit at that time, and that a time will come when human beings will have gone through their repeated lives on earth. The earth itself will drop away, and they will enter into a different form of life, one which will again be in the spirit. I can only mention this briefly. Details can be found in my book titled Occult Science. The work done in the science of the spirit may be going against the mainstream of present-day thinking. But we are nevertheless able to say that leading thinkers of the past, I concluded the lecture I gave 2 days ago in the same way, did have an inkling of the ideas that are now coming to life again in the science of the Spirit. They did not have this science in the form in which I have presented it to you, for it is a child of our time, and will develop out of the education which people have today. But individuals who in the past knew themselves in their hearts to be united with the Spirit of the cosmos, the Spirit that is active and alive in all human beings, put thoughts into words that we, in the science of the Spirit, can wholeheartedly agree with. The science of the Spirit shows us how we can understand life between birth and death by perceiving the immortal element, which also lives in a world of the Spirit, as it is active and alive in our physical bodies and in the whole of physical life. It shows us that we have life when in our bodies because of the life we have when out of the body. No one can therefore understand life between birth and death unless they have understood life outside this physical firmament. Goethe, who clearly had an inkling of what our science of the Spirit would reveal, put this in words which give a clear indication not only of his belief in immortality, but also of his awareness that insight gained into the present life and experience of it has true value only if we know that immortal life fills our life on earth with its fire, light, and activity. Let us therefore sum up the knowledge gained through our science of the Spirit, which is that a true inner reality of mortal life is found through immortal life. And our present inner response to this knowledge, in words that were once used by Goethe, quote, "To those who are not at all willing to consider the particular character of the present life in order to arrive at an idea of another life, I," close quote, these are Goethe's words, continue quote, "would say with Lorenzo de Medici that all those who do not hope for another life are dead also with regard to this life," close quote.